in a couple of minutes. If you want to go ahead and say what you're, you could enter comments in the comments field. We're going to collect some information. Just checking, make sure audio is coming through. So if you wanted to go ahead, we're going to collect questions for those watching live. For those people watching live, if you want to go ahead and just give a quick introduction saying where you're from. It's always interesting for me to see. And you could also, in the comments field, ask questions. And we'll kind of collect questions. We've often take a little bit of time to have people send in type questions and kind of collect them. But if you want to do, if you're watching this offline, you may want to skip ahead like 10. Sometimes it takes 15 minutes by the time we get all the questions collected. And in the past, we've had some people that have always been incredibly kind to do an index of all the topics that we discussed during the Hangout. Saying like at 15 minutes, 30 seconds, we talked about this topic. At 20 minutes, we talked about this topic, etc. So it's always appreciative when people do that because people could kind of go to specific areas of the video to see a particular topic. But please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself. And if you have questions, we'll go ahead and start collecting those. I'll put them into a little text document and we will get started in a couple of minutes. All right, so we have Rob from the Netherlands. We have Behind the Couch Studio, I believe it's Peter from Berlin. We have Freud from Connecticut. I believe it's Connecticut. And once again, we've had a number of people that sent some questions in advance. But if you have questions and topics that you want to go over, please just kind of enter them in the comments field. All right, so people from Ireland, Senegal, more people from Germany, Dublin, we have Atlanta. All right, we have Glorian from Russia. He had sent some questions in, I believe. Indonesia, United Kingdom, Sweden, Portugal, Mexico, Florida, Israel. All right, Canada. Another person from Israel and Spain. Beirut. Latvia. Italy, Argentina, Detroit. All right, so people logging in from all over the world. This is always really interesting for me to see. I just look at two laptops and talk to them, so it's great to see where people are from. Belgium. All right, yeah, we have your questions, Glorian. So, Sacramento, Florida. All right, Grant from Los Angeles. Good to see you online. Romania, we have Miami. So we had one question about what software I'm using for the screencast. I'm just actually using just the Google Hangouts. So if you just kind of go to YouTube and do a live event, that's all that I'm using. So no real special software for that. And then I choose to share my screen. All right, someone from Ecuador. And once again, if you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask those questions. You could enter them in the comments field. So see a question about Mackie control. All right, so we see people from England. Okay. All right, so we have from Newcastle, England. All right, so we have someone that just had Cubase 8.5 coming from Pro Tools. Any tips on workflow? Yeah, we could do that for hours. If there's anything specific that you wanted to cover, any areas that would be helpful, but we'll go ahead and copy that over. Okay, so see on stripping silence, we'll go over that. All right, so we have pair from Norway. 2 people in a row from Norway. I apologize. You may hear some noise on the microphone in the background. So my neighbor is getting their roof done, and it's so the workers have been up on the roof, kind of nailing stuff in all day. So if you hear some weird thumps and bumps in the background, that's what it is. All right, so we have someone from India. Okay, so a question on some playback. I'm just kind of copying over some of the questions in the comments in my document here so that we can look at it. I said people from Macedonia, some more people from Italy. Okay, Patrick, I have your question that you emailed me on, so we'll go over that about the VST paths. Someone from Poland. More people from Germany. Always love visiting Germany. I wish I could go more to Europe and other countries. I get to travel vicariously doing these presentations. Okay. So a question about faders and integrating that from your keyboard. So we had a question, is Cubase 9 coming anytime soon? I'm sure that the developers are always working on something. So okay, question on the metronome. I'm just kind of cycling through. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to go and ask. Type them in the comments field. We'll get started in just a minute. right, just going through collecting comments and questions here. Thank you for all the great questions. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so there's a question, how long will we welcome everyone? Why not just start? Because I'm actually copying over people's questions now that people are asking. So do that while we're getting introduced. Okay, I see a question why Cubase 7 can't run on OS, Mac OS Sierra 10.12. They're currently doing they do a number of exhaustive tests for compatibility, so that's what they're kind of going through now. So but sometimes there's stuff that gets changed that's out of our control. So but I think most of the software programs are still kind of going through different tests. So I think we'll have an announcement pretty soon in regards to compatibility. All right, so there's a question. Can you use the contact player with Cubase 7.5 artists or other plugins? Yeah, you can use any VST plugin with all the versions of Cubase. So unlike other programs, we don't restrict your capabilities depending on which version of Cubase you have. So you're able to run all third-party plugins in any version of Cubase. Okay, you see a question, can I run all plugins in that box for an unlimited time or just 1 month as a demo? So the plugins that come with Cubase will actually work unlimited with the program, and there may be some other plugins in the box, the trial versions, and the trial versions will generally work for a month. Okay, so we're seeing a comment about, and I believe it's probably referring to Sierra, about on Mac disabling NVRAM protection in case of Sierra. All right. There's a question, if Cubase Pro 9 comes out early next month, will the Google Hangout likely land just before or after it? Whenever it comes out, we would probably not do the Google Hangout the day before or a couple days before if something new is coming. So, but I'm not sure when something new is coming. All right, so we have a number of questions. Let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go through some of the topics that were emailed in. If I go through this, so we have a couple pages of questions. So this question was emailed in. I just had a question with regards to workflow. Is there any way to assign a controller, for example, a Midi fader or knob to do the following? In the Midi editor piano roll, when editing Midi velocities, if I group or select a group of notes, is there any way to assign a Midi control to adjust the velocity? It would greatly speed up workflow to be able to select a group of notes with the mouse on your right hand and then just quickly drag a fader to adjust the velocity. So there's a couple of different ways that we could do this inside of Cubase. So let's say if I just want to play, we'll make this the active project here. We'll just do a little piano so we could adjust some velocity. All right. I'll double click so we can see our velocity lane here in the bottom. And the velocity is how hard each key was pressed down. So if I wanted to adjust the velocity, let's say for this these notes starting right here. One of the ways to do this, so you could select just kind of lasso a group of notes. It could be just some notes or whatever notes you have selected here. And if you wanted to kind of maintain the velocity curve, at that point you could just say, let's say if I would just want to do the velocity curve for these notes, you'll see the info line here at the top. And here you could adjust your velocity. And if you wanted to, One of the things you could do is you could actually have the acoustic feedback on. I'll just turn it off so it's less annoying. You could just use your mouse scroll wheel to adjust the velocity curve and still kind of maintain the relationship between all the velocities. But if you don't want to, and I understand kind of in the heat of battle of editing MIDI, but if you just kind of select a group of notes, you can now hold down the Control and Shift keys. And then you'll see that the cursor, when you go over a note, turns into like a little speaker. So while holding those keys down, I could move my mouse cursor up and down and adjust the velocities just that easily. So if I just wanted to take a whole group of notes here and bring the velocities up or down. So again, just hold down the Control or Shift key and then just put the cursor right on top of the note and be able to adjust, and just while holding the left mouse button down, adjust it up and down, and then you could see your velocities be controlled just like that. All right, so one other question that we had, and this was asked from the tail end of the last Hangout, is how do, let me just, says, Steinberg, can you please tell me how to sync one track to exactly half the tempo of the project tempo? So there's a number of ways of doing this. Let's say if I just have a particular audio event here. So let's say I have a drum loop, and this drum loop is, I believe, 175 beats per minute. So if you wanted to just change the tempo, one way of doing that is you could select the audio file, and then if you go to process. Now, sometimes the default mode of Cubase would you may see your toolbox look like this. If you hold down a Control key, you can toggle the behavior. So I personally prefer to see all my context-sensitive menu options, and there's a preference to set that as well. So if you go to Preferences at this point, under Tools, you'll see this pop-up toolbox on right-click. If you uncheck that, you'll get the extended version. So if I wanted to take like all the tracks or just one event, I could right-click to select. I'm going to select the event, right-click, and go to Process, and we'll say time stretch. So here I want it to be 200%. So basically, it's going to take that tempo and automatically just play back that loop. We'll just jump forward here. So that's one way of doing it. A lot of people would prefer to place the audio into musical mode. And if you have audio in musical mode, it will automatically follow the tempo of the actual metronome. So what I do is I could just kind of select the audio events here, and we could place them into musical mode. And now whatever tempo I have, so let's say I play back at 175, and I can type in 120, or exactly half tempo, 87.5. And now as you kind of play back, or if I want it to be 200 beats a minute, or 2 beats a minute, that's pretty extreme change. So now let's say I want it to be 200 beats a minute. Now the tempo will just automatically follow whatever the tempo is here once you select it and put it into musical mode. So that's kind of an easy way to be able to have your audio fit. So if you wanted that one track, you could just simply choose to offline process it or put it into musical mode if you want to do kind of a halftime feel. All right, so I'm going to look at some of your comments. I think we have some more questions come in. Just let me collect those and we'll move on. All right, so we had a question that was asked just in the comments field. If all songs from a band are going to be pretty much the same as far as their levels and effects, how do you apply all these to the next song they record? Okay, so we could do this within the mixer quite easily. So let me just open up a quick multi-track project here. Sometimes I have to find stuff that hasn't been released for YouTube purposes and licensing. So give me just a second here. Okay, so let's say we had like a jazz group that came in, and all of a sudden we kind of wanted to use the same rough settings for the next song because the instrumentation is very similar. So we look at the mixer. And I'll just kind of get my mixer set up. So let's say I wanted to take all these tracks and I wanted to use this as kind of like almost a mix template. What you could do is just come here and say, okay, let's select all these channels and say we have our master effects. And then right up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see this little pull-down menu. And here what you could do is just say we want to save selected channels, and you'll get it kind of as a mix. So we'll say Kip Mix. Here's the artist here. So now if I have all my effects set up and now I've done kind of horrible things and I want to go to the next song, but it's in a different project, but I wanted the same consistency, all I would have to do now is go to that same pull down menu and just say we're going to select all the channels again. And now we say let's load selected channels, and we'll say our Kip Mix. And now you can see all those would be set directly back to where they were. So again, make sure that you select channels, and sometimes people ask me this, like how do you select from all the channels? If you hold down the shift key, select like the far left channel and select the far right channel while holding down the shift key, it will select all the channels in between. Okay, just copying over some more questions here. Okay, I've been trying this, but the question was, in earlier versions, you could visually adjust the threshold, a noise gate, audio process, noise gate, seeing the waveforms. Now it seems you're going to do the audio preview. Are you missing something? So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. So I'm just going to select this track here, and we'll go to the process. So it could be, and I'm not sure if that was there before. And this goes into one of the other questions that was asked where maybe this is getting... maybe it was this function, and this goes back to the strip silence. So if I just kind of go to my audio, and let's say I go to my advanced menu, one of the functions that you'll see here from audio to advanced is detect silence. And here you could kind of see the threshold amount. So you could say, okay, this is my open threshold, and then be able to determine and be able to split that way. So that's how you could do a using kind of the detect silence. So to access the detect silence, I don't remember either way if the noise gate had that functionality. You could also, once you're in the sample editor, set the threshold here when going into hit points, and here you could set the threshold. But I could go back to maybe some earlier versions to make sure to see if that has changed, but I don't remember it either way. But I could send that on to the developers just to check to see if that had changed at one point. Okay, just going through some of the questions that have come in. All right, good to see Casey. So I see a question, why am I using Windows 7? This actual computer, just Cubase ran fine on Windows with Windows 10, but stuff like, web browsing didn't work. So that's why I'm running Windows 7, but I'll probably be getting a new computer soon. So my next computer will be Windows 10, I'm sure. All right, so we have a question, why aren't there more Quantize presets for MIDI, like MPC, etc.? One of the cool things that you could actually do inside, is there's two things that you do a lot with different kind of groove quantizing presets. And, Cubase is the first sequencer way back like 93, 92 that allowed you to do this. But if you do have a MIDI track, I'm just going to add a MIDI track here, is one of the really handy tools that a lot of people miss, and you can do this as a MIDI insert, is the Quantizer plugin. And here you could actually just kind of adjust different swings and feels. So if you're kind of going for an MPC vibe, that's a very easy way to attain that. If we have parts that have been, let's say I want to take the I'll take the kick, and let's say I really like the groove of this particular kick. One of the things that you could actually do is as soon as you come here within the sample editor, so double click the audio file to go into the sample editor, and then go to hit points, and again you could adjust the threshold appropriately. At this point you could actually just say create groove, and then once that's been done, as soon as I actually go to quantize some MIDI events, so let's say if I just had some MIDI here, do my fine 20th century composition here, 21st century now. But when I go to quantize, I could open up my quantize panel, let's say just to the left here, and you can see the actual quantize preset here. So it's really easy to kind of make your own quantize presets very easily. So a lot of people just do that, and you could take any MIDI information or any audio loop and make your own quantize presets and have it be a little more authentic. Right, just going through a couple of comments that have come in. Okay, so we have a question on side chaining. We'll get to that in just a little bit. And a question on working with large templates. So the question is, I'm building a huge template with lots of big VSTs. I'm using one instrument track per instrument. What can I do in Cubase to economize footprints? One of the things that's really handy on large projects is, to have folders. So let's say if I wanted to open up, it's kind of interesting. A couple months ago, I was at Junkie XL's room, and I think his opening template was up to 3,200 tracks in his Cubase. So, it's not uncommon for people to be doing large sessions like that. But let me just find one here that... okay, I'll just open up this project. Give you an idea. And one of the great things you can do is using folder tracks. So a lot of times you may have just, tons and tons of various tracks all together. Like here, I have a number of background vocals. And what you could do is actually just kind of place these into folder tracks. And what folder tracks will, and I have this kind of done a bit already here, but I'm just going to select these and take them out of folder tracks. And this is one of the things that not all programs have. Some people are asking some differences between this and other programs. So instead of having to scroll, and imagine scrolling through 3,200 tracks, if I wanted to take all these, you could right click on it and just say move selected track to new folder. And this folder, could be background vocals or strings, brass. And now what you could do is you could just open and close that folder. Now you could also have, let's say, a folder within a folder track as well. So sometimes I may see people that have strings and then folders for violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, bass, etc. So you could have nested folders within folders within folders. So in this way, you could actually very easily organize kind of, really large projects. So, the folders, I often see composers with these are my bass sounds, these are my analog synth, these are kind of 80s synth sounds, these are strings. Within strings, I have violin, viola. Within brass, I have, all my trumpet sounds within its own nested folder. So really explore kind of using of folders, and that could just really kind of speed up your workflow so that you don't have to scroll so much in your project, and you can just kind of navigate between your folders. And there's obviously keyboard shortcuts to open and close folders, and so again, you got folders within folders within folders. So doing that can really make a big difference in organization of a large scoring template. Okay, so we had a question. This is a good question. What would be the best strategy for backup and restore Cubase settings, plugin database in case of OS reinstall? And question number 2, I believe this is from the same person. Is Steinberg considering implementing a more straightforward way of this in the next version? All right, so one of the things that came out in Cubase 8.5, which is a great feature for most people, and sometimes the 0.5 version, some of the features can get lost, but is something called a profile manager. So you could now just simply come over here and save your different profile manager. So this could be your profile with all of your user presets, pretty much, your preferences, your key commands, everything that you would need to go somewhere else and make a plain vanilla version of Cubase work exactly as it is in your setup. So you don't have to sit there and change 20 preferences, different appearance, screen layouts, all that stuff. So, we felt the pain, and that's why we created the profile manager. So We have many people that, you know, share different like composition suites for different composers. And now whenever they go to someone else's suite, they could just open up their profile, and Cubase works the same way that they do at home. And you could just, you know, put it on a network, put it on a thumb drive, or copy it over to the computer, restore that profile, start Cubase, and everything will be restored for you. So that's a really great thing to do. So if you haven't played with the profile manager, just save that. That's the exact intention of that feature. So you see a question on improving performance on your laptop. You know, always having, you know, more RAM, faster processor is really good. One of the main things that you could do on Windows, and you could do it in a couple of different areas. One is if you go to the device setup, you know, you may have to, depending on your audio interface and your computer, being able to go to and adjust the buffer size could be handy. Now there could be, one of the things that often happens is you could make sure that you have multi-processing activated if you have that, and also activating ASIO guard. And what this allows you to do is to, like, for the currently active tracks that you're playing or recording on, can run at a lower latency, while the other tracks will run at kind of a higher latency in the background. So that's also can help out performance significantly. And there's this little demure checkbox. And some of these are more for Windows than Mac, because you know, you could tweak it a little bit, and you know, there's pros and cons with that. But this little thing that says activate Steinberg audio power scheme. A lot of laptops are guilty of, and we'll just take a look at my Windows control panel here. And when you go to like power settings, because a lot of times the actual, you know, how laptops are judged, one of the biggest criteria is length of battery life. So a lot of PC laptops will actually kind of throttle the actual performance, so that your CPU is running not at full speed, but your battery will last longer. So you could have it set to high performance. If you activate the Steinberg audio power scheme, that will also take care of that. And this way, make sure that at least, you know, you activate the Steinberg audio power scheme. If you don't do that, make sure that you put, you know, the plan to high performance as opposed to, you know, an efficient energy saver use. And that will definitely help with your laptop performance. Okay, so we had a question on VST instruments versus track instruments. Okay, so we'll just do a new project here. And we'll just start with empty. So what's the difference? So people often ask this. And it's kind of more of a legacy feature. So when we have track instruments and rack instruments. And it started off from kind of a historical and we'll say a legacy standpoint, that rack instruments was how Cubase first started off, and this mimicked pretty much what a traditional, like if you're using outboard, like Midi sound devices, tone modules, outboard drum machines, how that would be, and it would show up kind of like in a rack, like you had a rack of equipment. So if I come here and let's say I activate my Halion Sonic SE, which comes with every copy of Cubase here, I can see now that I've started this off in an instrument rack. One of the things was some of the earlier differences were that this could now have however many outputs automatically turned on. In later versions, it'll default to a stereo output, and it will default to the first stereo output of the instrument turned on. So if we go just to the right of this, we could now come over here and you could activate all the outputs. So if you needed to have, you know, different sounds going to different mixer channels, you could do that. So the earlier differences with the rack instrument versus the track instrument, it was the rack instrument could have multiple outputs and could be also multi-timbral. So the original intention of rack instruments was to make it very fast and easy. So if I had a instrument track, this would automatically kind of consolidate the audio and MIDI information. But if I had again, we'll just open up a Hallian Sonic SE rack. It used to be that would only be one stereo output and would only allow you to have one MIDI channel. So it wasn't multi-timbral. So at this point, one of the things that you're able to do, which was added in 7.5, is since 7.5, we could add all of your different outputs here. So I could activate outputs to instrument tracks for multi-outs. And if I have this track selected, an instrument track selected, I can now add multiple MIDI tracks and kind of turn it on. And so I have my instrument track here, and we see that this is going out to the Hallian Sonic SE, MIDI channel 1. And now as I go down, you'll notice that this will automatically keep the same MIDI output destination port, but automatically increment the MIDI channel as we go down. So while there used to be more differences, you know, in some instruments, like if you wanted them to be in multi-timbral mode where you wanted one instrument that was playing back 16 sounds, the instrument rack was a better way of doing that. With version 7.5, you know, some of the limitations that were there before of being only stereo output and not being multi-timbral have kind of gone away. So they're very similar. One thing also to consider is you could now disable, I believe you can disable the instrument tracks without taking up a lot of CPU power. So while they were kind of two different kind of schools of thought, you know, they've really over the years have kind of merged closer together. So it can be a little confusing. All right, we'll take a look at some other questions. All right, so we have a question. Best way to edit controller data to compress the data to be within a given range. Say you have data ranging from 5 to 100, but you want to compress that data to within a range of 26 to 63. All right, so let's go ahead and just draw in some, I assume that this is going to be for like MIDI CC data, so I'll just go ahead and we'll draw some in. Turn this off so you don't have to hear my score, my hit song. All right, so let's say I now have, I'll just make this a little taller here. Let's switch this to, let's say, modulation. And let's make it just taller. So let's say I have my modulation values here, and I wanted to kind of compress that. One of the things you could do is actually just kind of select the range, and you could pull up, and this is actually from kind of one of the features that was developed originally for note expression editing that could be applied directly to MIDI controller data as well. So if you select that range, you can just kind of go over to the actual, the right hand edge to the center and then just compress your data just like that. So that way you could just kind of easily compress and expand the data. Some of the other tools, if you wanted to tilt, so if you want to tilt that way or this way, you could do that. You could also kind of, you know, if you grab the top center line, so there's some really, you know, so if you wanted to kind of just compress the contents, you could set up a logical editor preset if you needed it to be exactly within particular ranges. But I probably think that will probably do the trick for you pretty easily for that. But if not, just let me know and we could go through some more logical editor setting it up. But hopefully that does the trick. All right, just going through a couple of questions. All right, so question, best way to create harmonies function. The question is, lots of times I use the function, it doesn't sound right, and editing is required to get the notes right. So one of the things that you want to do, this will work best when using the chord track. So they really kind of work hand in hand and together. So let me just open up a particular project that we can take a look at this. So right now I have like a lead vocal and a piano part. So if I just solo the vocal here. Something's wrong. Tell me why. All right, so I will just do that phrase where she says, "Tell me why." So I'm going to grab the range selection tool here. Now let me just turn off snap. You may notice that sometimes when you do edits, and then like you may notice that it's going to like automatically snap to the bar here. And if you're like, oh, I want it to be in between that, you could just turn the snap key on and off, and that's the letter J. So if I create harmonies here, so now let's say I go to my audio and generate harmony voices. And what it'll do is it'll kind of do like a third or fifth. And let's just go ahead and we'll listen to this with the piano. Tell me why. So, you know, often what it's not going to do is kind of, you know, it'll do harmonies, but, you know, it's not going to make such musical sense. But if I actually select the piano part here, and then get a chord track and choose create chord symbols. And now that it knows what the chords are, and it does that for MIDI parts, it's not necessarily going to do it from audio. It's not accurate enough. But now what I'm going to do is just choose to do my generate harmony voices. And since it knows what the chords are to deal with, it'll work. So, you know, while you can do the harmonies without it, you will have to do a lot of editing. You could extract the chords from a piano part, or you could just simply, you know, if you know what chords are in that part of the song, be able to work with that. Now, what's really interesting is once you go into like the VariAudio editor, and you could actually just select all of the voices here, and let's go to VariAudio. And we'll just activate it. You can now colorize based on the chord track. So even if you were just coming here, you could now select all of your different voices. So if I move a note, let's say to a red, we can see that, you know, green notes fall within chords, blue notes fall within the scale, and red notes are out of key. So if I move a note to a red note, that may not sound as good as moving it to a green note. So you can see visually as you move the notes if it's going to work harmonically based on the chord track. So that should, so the chord track will definitely help with harmonies. Otherwise, it's kind of guessing with no reference point. So I'm seeing, is the workflow different in Nuendo? Pretty much everything we're doing is available in Nuendo as well. All right, so I was seeing a question. Could we have a global purge button to purge all VSTs of all but the used samples for all tracks except for those nominated by the user? This would be a killer feature for RAM savings. We thought so too, so that's why we actually put it in like our Hallion sampler. So it's a feature in Hallion. It's a feature inside of the Grand as well. So it really kind of depends on the plugin manufacturer to implement that, but we do have that functionality in Hallion as well already. So, all right, we'll go through some of our questions that are coming in. Thanks everyone for the great questions. All right, let me just cycle back. I think I may have missed a couple questions that have come in. All right, I see a question in, I think, what is Russian, so I don't understand. I'm sorry, I'm ignorant. But maybe if someone from Sharon, I believe there's someone, I think looks like Russian. I could be totally wrong. But maybe if someone could translate, if anyone else understands some of the comments. All right, just going through some of the questions here. Just give me just 1 second. All right, so. Okay, so we have a question. So is it possible to program controls from Cubase 8.5 and send that mapping to an external MIDI control, instrument example knobs, faders, etc.? Yeah, there's a number of ways to do it. One of the great things that you have in Cubase is a concept of quick controls. So let me just, I'll just revert this project here. And these could be set up very easily for, like, I have a generic MIDI controller. So let me just revert this project and we'll show you some quick controls. And we see these 8 knobs here on the virtual instruments. These are kind of quick controls. And a lot of the instruments, you can come here and map out what elements. So you have kind of 8 quick controls that could be accessible at one point in time. So this is one way of doing it, and another way is just using the generic MIDI remote. And I had a question from that I got a phone call from the other day, and she, the performer, she wanted to take her Nord Electro 2 keyboard, and it had a foot switch for like the rotary encoder for the organ sounds, and she wanted that to do start and stop. So it was just, so we set up a generic remote. So if we go to device setup, the remote controls are kind of a bit hidden. So if you actually click on the little plus symbol here, you can see all of the remote, the different control surfaces that are available directly and supported for Cubase. Like a lot of control surfaces will work under Mackie control. If not, you have something called generic remote. So here you set the input and output for what your synth is actually doing. At this point, you can say, okay, this controller is controlling, this particular, this is the incoming MIDI message. And if you don't know what the MIDI message that's being transmitted from the knob, move the knob and hit the learn button and it will capture it for you. So in the case where the performer, she wanted, and a lot of these will default to VST mixer, where the performer wanted it to do start and stop specifically so that she could start her sequence, play along, and then hit the same foot switch and stop. So we went here and we said, let's go to command, and then these will all be kind of subcategories. And then under transport, we'll see a function for, and if you're kind of just want to type it in, so we could just say, okay, let's go to start, stop. So now every time that she hit her foot switch, which I believe was controller 82, it would now just automatically start, stop. So you could do that for a number of different VST instruments. Now, obviously, you may not want to map everything for every single plugin. So let's say if I'm here on a particular MIDI track, I could just say, okay, I want to take this voice, and you could actually have your quick controls here. So in your quick controls, you could actually pick and choose your different elements. So I want this to be just a volume. I want it to be panning. And let's say I want this to be, any MIDI CC message. So, and then once you have this set up, you can go to the device menu. So we can have 8 quick controls, and you could do this for audio tracks as well. So let's say I go to my quick controls here, and you could just learn the MIDI message from there, but you could also just kind of load up different quick control presets as well. So if you wanted to just kind of, let's see if I remember how to do this, but you could, as you can see, I just want this to control send, level, or the panner for send to, whatever you want it to do. So you could learn the MIDI message and control that right there. Or you could also have your MIDI controller always set up to do quick controls. And this could be set up by going to the devices menu, to device setup, and then you could have, your track quick controls or VST quick controls, and then these 8 knobs or sliders that you have set up can control your quick controls automatically for you. So there's a number of ways of doing it. It's obviously tricky to do, so many different controllers for so many different things, but, you can get it set up pretty easily in a generic fashion to, accomplish a lot of the different tasks at once. So I'm seeing, is it possible to create folders in the Quantize presets? I don't think so, but we'll go ahead and take a quick look. So let's come here and I'll just do a quick tempo detect. I'll just do a quick hit point detection, and we'll just create again our, just adjust threshold just a little bit here. Okay, so we'll create that groove. It's now in there. Yeah, so I don't know a way of doing folders. It might be available in an XML file. I can dig that up if you send me an email for the next meeting. Okay, so we had a question on micro tuning. So I guess this is probably dealing with different temperaments and scales. So let's say if I listen to piano here. So if we now come over here and under MIDI inserts, you'll see, I think we have a little tuning MIDI plugin. So we have micro tuner. And here you could have kind of different scales, different temperaments here. So let's say, okay, I want it to be equal temperament, and this will just kind of do different levels of mean temperament. So as you play. So at that point, there you could actually do, pure major, pure minor. So that's one way that you could do it. Now, also within the project setup, sometimes you may run into situations where equal temperament, because a lot of string orchestras will actually kind of gravitate and choral groups to like a pure temperament. So you can use kind of the built-in MIDI tuner, micro tuner plugin, and that will affect the MIDI in real time. And there's also a technique called her mode tuning, which is activated from the project setup. So we'll just kind of load this up, and it's kind of an interesting. Of all the videos I've done on YouTube, this was one of the most controversial. Where I actually took particular tracks, and you could go to your project setup. And then at this point, you could activate under HMT type, you could activate her mode tuning. And what this will actually allow you to do is you could pick, like, if you wanted to be pure tuning or different kind of tuning temperaments, because obviously when we do like piano bass instruments, they're going to be in equal temperament, and some people the equal temperament can really sounds really out of tune for them. I remember working with Donald Fagen one day with Steely Dan, and he was just telling me he didn't like MIDI a lot because of equal temperament, and it really kind of bothered his tuning sensibilities because it wasn't pure. So a lot of musicians will kind of, do different tuning scales and tune their instruments in particular keys. And you see guitar players doing this a lot. But just to kind of show you, this is the actual first example. These are all kind of in standard equal temperament. And I just kind of did a pretty boring whole notes with wind instruments. But you could hear some of the notes, chords being out of tune. And then I chose to do the same thing, but with the her mode tuning activated. So you can hear how much better that sounds in tune. So same exact instruments. Now if I play them the equal temperament and the her mode tuning together, it sounds like this. So you can definitely kind of hear that difference. It sounds like we have a chorusing or flanging plugin on the files, but again, it's the same exact notes. So if you want to do different kind of micro tunings and microtonality, you could activate the her mode tuning, and then once you go here, like on a particular MIDI part, I believe it's under. Just make sure everything is under MIDI modifiers. I believe, where you could tell it to follow the her mode tuning or not to follow the her mode tuning for each track. So that's kind of an easy way to have different microtonality if you need it in the MIDI domain. Okay, so we had a question if you can write MIDI volume to multiple tracks. I think if you just select all the tracks and put it into record and record MIDI volume, that it's automatically applied to all the different tracks. If you wanted to come here to like the virtual instrument tracks, let's say, you can now also just choose to see, you know, the MIDI track. So if I wanted to have, let's say if I had different MIDI tracks, so if I come here to different track instruments, so say I added 4 Mystics. So now when I come in here, if you wanted to, you know, control the volume, of these, you could also just kind of, while this isn't MIDI CC7, you can in the mixer, if you just wanted to kind of treat it for mixing, just do quick link and automate that within the mixer. All right, so question, why can't I color code the entire length of my track in the mixer like Pro Tools? It's set up a little differently because, you know, we have a lot more going on in the mixer. But I think once you kind of get used to seeing the particular mixer, it's a little easier in the eyes, and if you kind of know where to look for the particular colors. So let's say if I just find a larger project here. So now as soon as I come here, let me just activate this project. And so I have my track colors here. So, yeah, at this point we want to kind of have a bit more uniformity with the mixer. So you see kind of the colors on the bottom faders here. So it's one of the things that will be different, but, you know, other things that you're going to have is an EQ on every channel, your channel strips on every channel. So you may not want to have like every plug-in that you have going on and seeing those set against different colors from a user interface perspective. So I think that's some of the reasoning. All right, so I see a question. Can I use one activation code on 2 PCs? Depending on which version of Cubase you have, they'll all work on a USB-E licenser. So if you wanted to just simply move your, you can install Cubase on as many programs, like Cubase Elements, LE, and AI, the OEM versions. We'll use a soft E licenser, and that's kind of tied directly to the computer. The soft E licenser can be transferred to a USB E licenser, which is what like Full Wave Lab or Dorico or, you know, the Cubase Artist, Cubase Pro, Nuendo have. And then you could have Cubase installed on many machines and just simply move your USB E licenser to whatever machine that you want to run it on. And I've heard some people express, you know, concerns over that. I could tell you, you know, I do over 100 flights a year, and, you know, I have my same key for 14 years now without losing it. So it's pretty easy to, you know, work with. Okay, so we have a question on is there any way for quantizing modulation data or some presets for creating filter modulation, which is in time with the song tempo? So you can do a lot of, if we have, let me just jump back to our project that has some MIDI parts in it. Okay, so let's say I have modulation here, which is one of the things you could do in the logical editor. So if you wanted to come here, you could say I want to quantize. So we just come right over here. So let's say we're going to select, we'll say value 1 is equal to, or say type is equal to controller, and then we want to make sure that the type is equal to and we can say value 1 of the controller is equal to, and now you can just kind of scroll through with the mouse wheel, and then you can say what you want to do with it is I think you could quantize it from here. So let me just I've had to do like quantizing program changes for people, and just see if I can find it. So position, but I think what you could actually do, and probably what you want to achieve, is, let's say I wanted to get rid of this. So you can do it through the logical editor, but probably if you want it synchronized with your song, let's just make this part a little longer here. So as you go to draw in controller, so I'm just going to select like my sine wave tool. So let's say I wanted to start right at measure 6. And now if you just hold down the shift key, you can say I want to enter it in at that interval, or you could shift the interval here. So you could have that kind of lock to the grid if you wanted to do different modulation or filter sweeps. So you could quantize it if you programmed it after, but again, go to your drawing tool and you can select, sine wave, triangle, square, and then as you go to enter in the data, just hold down the shift key to change the frequency, and then you could just hold down the mouse and release. And I think that'll kind of do what you want to do. Okay, so we have a question on rendering in place. Says, how do I render only the selected MIDI track that is from a multi-out VST? Question 2, is there a way to render based on pitch? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So jump to one of our projects that we had up initially. I think this one. Okay, so the first question was, how do I render out the selected track that's to a multi-out VST instrument? All right, so I'm just going to activate a couple multi-outputs here. So I'll select just a part of it. Let me just so you don't have to watch it render. It's be the most boring thing of all time. So now I just choose render in place. Let's see if I have this window open. It might be in the background. I'll just use my try another project here real quick. Okay, so I see my render settings here, and this is going out to a multi-channel. So I just want it to be, we'll just keep it dry, and then just choose render. And now that's automatically just rendered that file out. That's, I'm going to make sure that that's going to a multi-out instrument. So I'll just open up the instrument here. I'll just add a new instrument, make sure it's multi-out, like the Italian Sonic SE. Copy that data there. And I want to make sure that we're going to have multi-outputs. And then when we do render in place, I could just say, let's go to my render settings here. So we say dry. So it will generate two different parts for the multi-outs, and it's kind of goofy. You can just kind of remove that selected track. Now, if you wanted to do only for particular pitches, you could actually just kind of come here, and let's say I want to select like only these particular pitches, and I believe if you just go directly here on the keys. So if you hold down the control key and click, at this point you could just choose to let's see, I think there might even be, let's see if there's, if I remember, a way of, so if you really needed only one pitch at this point, I think you could go into under edit, and say if we go to, I believe, under select, choose invert selection, you could temporarily delete and then render just that one particular pitch. But there isn't a way to, I don't know of a way otherwise of doing it to do the render in place. All right, just going through some of your questions. Okay, so one quick question is, how do you apply the scale colors? So let's say if I come here, so this works in conjunction with the chord track. So let me just come up with the right world's most generic chord progression here. Okay, so we see this is in C major. So now when I go to edit notes, and here I could actually, you'll see colorized, and then there you could base it on a chord track. So if I move some notes out of the chord track, so I can see what notes fall within the chord track or what notes fall directly within the scale. So the blue notes are within scale, red notes are out of key, green notes are in the chord. And within each of the editors, you have this choice of how you want the colors to be represented. So just choose chord track there. I think usually in the MIDI editors, it's velocity by default. Okay, so we have a question. Is there an easy way to adjust several vocal parts harmonies to start and end at the same exact time? Need to adjust several harmonies recorded on separate tracks the old-fashioned way. There isn't kind of an automatic tool for this. I know that some people, in the past have used like Vocal Line or Revoice Pro, I think is the latest incarnation of that. But I'll show one thing that could help quite a bit that a lot of people don't do. Let me just find a particular file here. Okay. Okay, here I have some vocal harmonies. So I know some people will take these, and sometimes you go to the editor and you're like, okay, I can't really see that. If you select these events here, so say I just take these background vocals, and go to audio and then say events to part, then I think this might make a little more sense. Then you can see all of these together in kind of much larger fashions. And let me see if this works as I expect. So let's say I just kind of cut, and even here you could very easily just kind of slip audio. So once it's kind of been split, you say this is the downbeat, and at that point you could kind of position the audio against the grid if you wanted to. So, and what I'm doing is I'm just holding down Alt and Control, and that will allow you to kind of slip the audio once it's been cut. So if you make a couple of cuts here, then you say, oh, I just want that to line up right there. Let's listen to it. So you can do stuff like that. So taking the parts, so once again, if you go to the audio menu and say events to part, then when you select them all and double click, that could take you into the part editor. And that is kind of a good way of doing a lot of background vocal edits. I've seen Chuck Ainley just kind of whiz through a lot of background vocal edits and comping using the part editor. So a question, can you tune non-vocal harmony parts? Yeah. So all you got to do, and this is one of the great things, it's in Cubase Pro. So if you double click on your lead vocal, you could actually just come here to the VariAudio, and now you could just do all of your vocal tuning, just like instead of having to have a third-party tool to do that, you can just kind of navigate and so. And then you could adjust by straight and pitch. You could adjust the vibrato. If, like we see that where they trailed off a note, you could double click here and create an anchor point and just kind of bring that up. If you want to select a number of notes, you could just choose to quantize the pitch, and what that'll do is just simply kind of move all those notes closer in tune. So you could do very powerful vocal tuning, or any solo instrument, saxophone, bass, very effectively inside of Cubase with the VariAudio. All right, so quick question: how can you save your instrument track with effects and everything? So let's say if I as a preset, so let's say I set up my most amazing stacked sound, or I come here, I have an instrument track, and we'll do our high-end sonic SE. And now, so we have, let's say we'll switch to maybe a Rhodes. All right, so say we have some effects there, but let's say I wanted to now just go to, so let's say I wanted to add EQ. We'll just make it really obnoxious EQ. And let's add some inserts here. So let's say I just want to add a little bit of distortion. So we'll say like a tube distortion, so we can. All right, so we made our horrible sounding Rhodes preset. So now all you have to do, we'll call it Dirty Rhodes, and just right click on a track and save track preset. So we'll call it Dirty Rhodes Hangout. Okay, we'll just call it Dirty Rhodes. Then when I come here, let's say, okay, I just want to add an instrument track, and then you can browse. At this point, you could just type in Dirty and then just double click, and now we go to look at the channel, and my tube is set up, my EQ. It won't carry over your send effects. If you wanted to do the send effects, you could select that and the send effects, and then just export the selected tracks, and then import that afterwards as a track archive. All right, just going through some of our questions sent in. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions. I hope everyone's learning a trick or two. All right, just reading through a couple questions that were mailed in here. Okay, just we have a bunch of comments and questions. So just going through it, sorry. Okay, lots of questions. All right. Okay, so is there a way to duplicate a track without data skipping using macros? The only way to do it I know of is to use the macro to kind of blow it out, but it's really like a 2 or 3 step macro. So it's, and you could assign that macro to a keyboard shortcut as well. All right, so question, is it possible to merge the VST instrument, MIDI, and audio not of the first channel? Or not of the same VST instruments? Just trying to... So Sharon, Robert, maybe I'm not understanding the question. Do you want to have like multiple instruments stacked together? So the question is it possible to merge the VST instrument, MIDI, and audio not of the same VST instrument? So one way to do that, if you wanted to layer instruments that sometimes people miss, and you could do this through what's called a MIDI send. So if I have a MIDI part here, so I'll just do it with a MIDI track here. So on MIDI sends, if you wanted to layer different instruments together, you could just come here, turn it on, and then when you play back one instrument, it could actually be routed to 4 additional instruments. So I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to achieve, but if maybe you could reiterate the question. Okay. Okay, so let's say is it possible to demonstrate how to beat match 2 songs with different BPM? The idea is to make a mix CD of several tracks in Cubase. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look. I think I have this already as a file. So let's say I want to take this. And let's say I have like a jazz piece here. And I'm going to activate this project. So let's say if I don't really have my tempo set, what you could do is actually just select the file here. And then under the project menu, go to tempo detection and say analyze. And what this will do is automatically just do an analysis of the file and figure out where the beats are. So it kind of figures out that, okay, it's in 1/4. It does it by the beat. So you have to kind of define where the downbeat is of your song. So it's going to have it in kind of 1/4 meter. So I can come here, have our pickup note. So right now we can see that almost at every single beat that this project is changing tempo. Now, if I wanted to, probably don't have another file that isn't copyrighted to use. But I'll show you what you could do. If you want this to automatically conform to any other tempo. Now, a lot of programs deal with audio that only really has like one value for the metronome. and that could be problematic for a lot of people. So as we're working with this, we could say, I want to go to my audio, and then you go to advanced, and you can do this for a multi-track as well, and say set definition from tempo. Now, once the definition has been set from tempo, you see this little music light appear here. So now, and I can do this with any number of audio files. If I just say playback at 120 beats a minute, playback 156, it's now playing back a perfectly steady tempo. 168. Or 132. Or even if I said, okay, I need to have this transition, I could actually just come here and just like we did earlier with our controller data, I could actually just say, okay, let's make that all a little more steady, but still have some variation, or let's have it ramp up or slow way down. So that way you could do that for a number of different audio files and have the same capability for doing your beat matching. So that way you could just lay it on to the same timeline and whatever tempo you want it to be. If you want it to vary, you want to slow down into the tempo of another song, you can just do very easily. All right, so we're seeing when is the next Cubase 8.5 update going to be released? I haven't heard of one. I'm sure that they are working on one. They are always kind of working on older versions as well. So so question, why there aren't presets for quantizing modulation data like ramp, saw, sine presets, which could sync to your song tempo. I think we probably showed that a little earlier, how you could just do it visually very easily. So, but just kind of using the drawing tools. Okay, so same question, about presets on audio channels. We can create folders for presets, but when loading the folders aren't there. It's going to kind of scan throughout. Cubase will look for your presets at any level. That'll do it based on the media bay. So if you open up the media bay here, you could do this. And one of the things you could do if you wanted to, if you've made a number of user presets, you could actually come here, and if you're looking for the presets, it may not carry over, but you could just drag and drop track presets from media bay. But if you said, okay, these are my MIDI loops that I've created, at this point you could say add that folder, and you say my MIDI loops or MIDI loops, and then when you go to actually search for different items, at this point you can say, I just want to look within MIDI loops. But we want you to be able to have access to all the files, regardless of the folder hierarchy or what level they're in the folders. But if you do want to see them at the particular folders, you could define your user preset folders in Media Bay. So once you have this, and if you don't see this open, just simply click in the lower left-hand corner, and then you could see under your kind of all of your directory tree, and then click add, and then that will be like one of your preset places that you could go to find your own content if you need to. So I see, will the quick controls map machine to pads to operate Halium pads? I think they just respond to MIDI messages, so I don't think you really even have to do quick controls. Just make sure it's the right MIDI message. Okay. See a question. In what format, FLAC, WAV, MP3, etc., can I export a song for mixing with Cubase 8 because it does not have batch export? So I think if you just, let's go to like our multi-track, like a multi-track project here. Just pop over here. Okay, so Cubase does have batch export. And I believe if you set this up where when you do your export audio mix down, all you'd have to do is come here. If you needed to hand this off to someone, is just choose from the file menu to export audio mix down. Just choose your batch export. And here you could choose it to be WAV, AIF, MP3, FLAC. And then you could choose, okay, I want the output files, my output channels, my effects channels, my VST instruments, my instrument channels, all my audio channels, and they could all be equal length. So. Okay, so seeing a question, is there any way to change master tune of Cubase so everything gets tuned at, let's say, 432 hertz? Yeah, this is always an interesting thing some people want to do. I've seen some artists that always feel that, you know, that the audio is, you know, like A is 442 for some artists I've dealt with, or some is 440, and there's obviously some people who wanted to do like at 432 because they see sand in a YouTube video look interesting. But if you wanted to just tune everything in real time, all you had to do is just really select all the audio events, and then you could just go to fine tune, and you could just drop it down to -8 here. And then when it plays back, you could actually listen to what 440 versus 432 and see if it makes a difference for you. But that way everything will still, you can still do all your editing without having any effect, but you could just select all the audio events and adjust your fine tune. And then you should be all set with that. So question on the track presets. So when you save track preset or export a track archive, what is included in save? Can you save with routings and other bits and pieces? The one thing that track presets don't include, I believe it does include routing. I know that the track archives will, but basically the send effects. So all of your insert effects could be stored, but if you wanted to have send effects, you could select the send effects and the audio tracks or MIDI tracks together as one track preset. And then at that point, so that's the major difference between them. All right, so we had a question asked again and mailed in earlier about retrospective recording of MIDI. So if you're not aware of this, is kind of a great little compositional feature. Sorry about that. So let's say I have my Rhodes patch here, and we'll activate this project. And I'll take off my insert here of my... All right, so let's say I was just kind of noodling around on this track, and let's say I had my virtual keyboard open. I just went, I go, oh, I wish I recorded that, but I wasn't in record. So I'm just going to turn this off because I need a keyboard shortcut. If you hit the Shift plus asterisk key, it'll now actually have that information in the audio, in the MIDI buffer for you. Now, I believe that Peter's question was, he ran into a case where it was before he hit record, and then at that point that it killed the buffer because the record was turned on. So it does function that way. I will pass it on to our developers as a feature request. But it does kind of behave the way that you ran into it in your example that you cited in your email. So we're seeing a question, is a way for Cubase to figure out the chord from a WAV file. There's some programs that attempt to do it, and none of it really kind of works as expected at this point. So maybe in the future. So see some other questions. Okay, so I'm seeing this question. Is there a way to select a selection of a track and have 2 or 4 automation points at the beginning and end of the selection to adjust automation within the selection? Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll just drop a quick drum loop on here. Let's just see. Okay, so we'll drop this on. Okay, so we'll just put that into a little loop. And this also will go to one question that someone had when you open up the automation lane. So let's say I just want to have just a little bit of automation here going on. I'll just take this out of musical mode. Sorry about that. All right, so let's say we have some automation going on. Now, one of the things that you could open up, you could hit F6 to open up the automation panel. And from here, there's a couple of options that are hidden here in the little setup window. So one is to show the data on the track. So someone had written in that sometimes they can't see the automation because the waveform is there. And it's like, oh, that's stupid. I can't see that. So we made it an option. So if you go to the automation panel and go directly here to the setup, you can say show data on tracks. So if you don't want to see the waveform within the automation lane, or you do want to see it, you could enable and disable there. Okay, so someone wanted to just take a selection of the automation. So let's say I'll just draw in some more automation here. Okay. So I think one of the cool tricks, if you wanted to, one of the cool things you could do also within the automation range. So if I just select, let's see if I remember how to do it. So let's say I just kind of select this range of automation. You could just kind of bring up, or just like we were doing earlier. So you could just do an automation range. It won't add kind of the 2 points. So if you have, let me just see if I remember. think there's one clever little trick that I read online. I think if we do, let me just turn off the snap here. So if you grab kind of the, I think it's the square wave tool and right in with like if you just want to do like a little automation bump. So say I just want to do like a little automation bump here. So hold down the shift key and just select with the square wave tool. And I think that'll probably do what you want to do. So you can just say, I just want a little automation bump right there, and that puts the point in to move from. So, and again, so just select the square wave drawing tool, and then hold down the shift key and say, I just want that bump right there. So I think that's what you want. If not, just kind of let me know in the comments. All right, so questions, little odd one. Why does my MIDI controller stop triggering halfway through a project? I have to close Cubase and restart it. I'm not sure what would cause Cubase to do that. Maybe it's your MIDI controller losing communication. So I'm not sure what would do that inside of Cubase. Make sure that one, you know, if you actually, as you hit the MIDI notes that you see in the MIDI activity, because maybe it's just, you know, you can see if it's lost communication or if it's just like there's a volume change or something like that within the file. So yeah, maybe you're just not hearing the MIDI being transmitted. But if you actually just kind of right click and make sure that your MIDI on the transport and make sure that the MIDI activity is on every time that you hit the key, if it's if you see the little activity here, like let me just turn on my virtual keyboard. I guess it doesn't show it there for the virtual keyboard, but see, make sure that it's, maybe you see if it's transmitting or not transmitting. All right, we're going through some of the comments here. Thanks to everyone for great questions. We have some more that people had sent in. All right, so I see comment, too bad you can't MIDI map Groove Agent sample start, sample end parameter. You know, so I guess if that, is that in referring to like editing the sample? So if you could clarify that, K1 Classic, just so I understand correctly. All right, so how would you provide a 4-count cue for someone punching in an area of a song that is not BPM defined, such as dynamic musical theater piece? All right, so let's say we have this and we have our punch in point here, so I'm just going to set a punch point based on those. I'm going to go to my transport and set punch points to selection range. Okay. Then let me just come here to metronome setup. And this may be like a feature in Nuendo that's not in Cubase. In Cubase, there's an actual use linear time, or Nuendo, there's a use linear time count. So you may, if there's no absolute kind of tempo map, you may have to like have an audio click. But inside of Nuendo, like a lot of people are using it for ADR purposes, you could have it where it'll just do like 3 seconds, like a 3-second count in based on that. But I don't see that in Cubase, so you might have to just have like I've seen people just have it like a quick audio sample of the click and just kind of map that where they think that the musician or the actor needs to hear it. But I'll pass that on to developers as well, see if that's one of those things that could migrate to Cubase in one day. All right. So question was also, how would you set up to have pickup notes recorded 1 bar before the left locator during a 2-bar 8 count in, so that 2 bars of click and recording starts 1 bar before the left locator? One of the things that you could do is, it's called retrospective record. So as you come in here, one of the preferences that you could have set up is that, Cubase will always be kind of recording. So let me just see if I remember if it's under record audio. So you have audio pre-record seconds. So if if you have it kind of, it will capture the audio in the buffer. And I believe it's going to be the command asterisk, like on the numeric keypad. So once that is enabled, you could just do the command asterisk, and what you'll be able to do is just to kind of roll this back to, so if they did have a pickup note. Some people will obviously give like an extra, we'll just lie to the musicians and, say they have and give them a 1 bar count in and tell them it's a 2 bar count in. But you could activate the retrospective record and then just slip that back. I don't have any audio routed to my interface, or I would show it. All right, so we had a question from Peter about lanes and resizing. So let me just jump to that project, and this is mailed in earlier. And I had this, and the question was when he would select the lanes that to resize that, it was soloing the event, and I had that reproduced on my system, but I don't think I'm doing it today. But I don't think I changed anything really. So here, if I have like a number of lanes, I'll just take this out of record. Sorry about that. All right, let me just revert this really quickly. Okay, so when you start working with lanes, we could now come right here, and let's go ahead. Say I have some drums and bass. So what the question was, let me just make sure it's out of record. Sorry about that. It was soloing for you, and if I'm doing this wrong, if I'm not understanding your question right, it seems like when I come here to resize my lanes, that it's not actually resizing the events or soloing the events. So, but I did recreate it earlier, I thought, but when I was kind of playing around with it today, I couldn't get it to recreate that it was automatically soloing the tracks based on resizing the lanes. So if I'm doing something wrong, just let me know, and we could revisit it. Okay, so question: when I go to save a project template, when a window pops up, I don't see any existing project templates, folders, etc. But in the hub, I see any existing or newly created templates. Okay, so to get to this question, sometimes, you know, and this is one of the things that's going to be stored in a profile, but sometimes it goes into a safe area that's not a normal place when, you know, it's kind of almost in a hidden folder in your, it goes into your preferences folder on Mac, or in the, or into your application data folder on PC. So sometimes it's protected that way, so you may not see it, but they are there. Okay, so let's go back, and Peter had clarified that the track was soloed. So I'm just going to take this out of record here, and then resizing it. I'm just going to reread Peter's comment here. So I'm not sure if that track was soloed, or like a Groove Agent track was soloed. So it still seems like it's not recording, but maybe if you could clarify again, and see if that's still soloing all your lanes. And I did have it kind of do exactly what you were doing before, and I tried a number of different preferences and couldn't find anything, but doesn't seem like it's doing it this time. So if there's something else I'm doing wrong, just let me know again, please. All right, so we had a question on using chord tracks, and with that combined with using track versions, which is kind of interesting. It's a very cool thing to do. And how do you switch between them when in linear mode? All right, so let me just revert to save. Just reading through some questions here. Thanks to everyone for great questions this month. It's really cool. All right, so I'll just revert this. So, you know, you can have track versions on, you know, different types of tracks, which could be interesting. So let's say if I just wanted to come here and say I was just kind of starting off and wanted a track version. So I could say, okay, I want D. Let's say going to G chord next. Then let's say we'll do like an F sharp minor, A in the bass, and then go into All right, so now if I wanted to just select the chord track here, you could open up track versions. And if you wanted to just start new, you could say, okay, let's just do a new track version. I would say, okay, I want this to be F going to D minor, going to C, let's say D minor here. And now if I want to get back to my first chord track, I could just click here. Let's go back to my second one. Now I could also just duplicate this version if I wanted just a variation. So let's say this, I want it to be a G chord. Or do you like this one? Or just didn't like that idea at all and go with the first one? So that's an easy way of just, so you can make new ones, duplicate versions, or delete track versions. So it's pretty easy to kind of work with your chord track. So if you wanted to try and you could also just kind of copy these. So it's to say, Control C, and I want to come here and paste. So if you wanted to have a variation in the second chorus, you could do that, and you could save that as a track version as well. So you can now just very easily handle those things. All right, just reading through a couple of the questions here. All right, lots of great questions this month. These are going to be 3 or 4 hours long pretty soon. All right, so this is great. Okay, let me just go back through some of these here. Okay, so all right, so lots of great questions. All right, so question from Michael Norwood: if I have a project and I want to make a template from it, how do I stop Cubase from looking for that project's audio files when opening the template? The one easy thing to do is just to go into, it's really easy to kind of have a project set up and say, oh, I just want a template of that. But that template will actually store all of the audio files. So let's say if I just come right here, I could just say, let's take my media bay, so you have the pool window, and the pool represents all of the files in your project. So if I come here and let's say I remove those files, right? And then all you have to do now is just simply, remove the files before you actually Now save as a template. Otherwise, you're saving your template with all of the audio files. But if you just simply go to your pool and remove all the files, save your project before doing that, or don't save it afterwards, then save it as a template. Otherwise, the template will include the audio files within the project. Okay, we have a question regarding HSO, which is the Hallian Symphonic Orchestra, from Richie Bergman. Is it better to use several instruments as several rack instruments, or to use them in Hallian 5 Sonic regarding CPU RAM usage? Hallian Symphonic Orchestra is a pretty efficient orchestra, but if you wanted the highest level of efficiency, especially with multi-core, you could use kind of the different instruments in different instances. So you could use it like one instance, and that would automatically kind of spread it around the cores. It used to be more apparent, like when we had like 2-core processors, and the computers weren't as fast as it were 7-10 years ago. It was more an issue. But if you're wanting to really save on CPU resources, that's a good way of being able to do, if you're looking to save CPU resources. I like to have everything, like when I'm doing orchestral stuff, as many loaded up into one particular interface, so I don't have to go between 16 different instrument windows. It could take probably a little more. It's probably not the best allocation of CPU cores, but I could do a lot with my older i7 PC, so it's no problem. All right, let's go through. Okay, so Grant asks, I would love to see a feature for Groove Agent 4 that would allow me to export individual stem files while retaining the Groove Agent 4 mixer FX. When you do a batch export, you could, one way to do that, there's several ways to do it. I think if you do it in a batch export, that the instrument sounds would automatically be incorporated. Let me just test that to make sure. Okay, so I'm just going to set this up. All right, so there's a couple ways that we could do that, and we'll do some really extreme settings here. So let's say we have our Groove Agent. All right, and let's say I go to my instrument kit here, and we edit this. So what I could do is actually now just go into my mixer. Now we had a question that was sent in about, okay, I don't understand the agent, the aux sends, the kit mixer, the master, what the difference between these are. So while we're here, we'll take a look at this. So each individual source here so say I'm just kind of playing back my drums. Each individual source here could have their own kind of like a vintage console channel strip. So you could have 4 bands of EQ. So like now I have my kick drum selected. If I wanted to have compression, tape saturation, or an envelope shaper, I could do that for each selected channel independently. Now each of these channels, we could have up to 16 stereo outputs, but I could also feed them to 16 outputs into my software, my master Cubase mixer as well. So we have aux sends, and now we can have up to 4 aux sends. So let's say I add a delay and a reverb. So and each of these aux sends could have 4 different effects stacked So if I want a delay that feeds into a flanger, into a chorus, into another delay, you could do stuff like that. But this will be aux send 1, aux send 2. So now if I go back to my agent, we see these 4 knobs. So if I want to have more reverb going just on my snare or just my kick, now let's say I just want to add a little delay to my snare. So if I wanted to edit the delay, I could just click here. So let's say I wanted a 16th note delay. And we'll adjust our feedback here. So, and then you could have a kit mixer, and this will be kind of global. And in this case, with the Groove Agent SE, the kit mixer and the master get to be very similar. If you had the full Groove Agent, you could have effects on each of the kits plus effects on the master in addition. So, so now if I wanted to come here, we'll just say I wanted to put on like a flanger on the entire kit, or so here you could just do that. So let's say I just want no effect there. So those are kind of the differences. So the kit and mix and master are very similar here because the full version of Groove Agent will have 4 separate agents, and then each of those separate agents could have effects in addition to a global master effect. So I'm going to activate a couple of outputs here. So let's say I want output 2. I'll do output 2, 3, 4. So I'll go back to my main mixer here, and I just want to choose, let's say my kick will go out of output 1, my master. I want my snare going out of output 2. Let's say my hi-hat to output 3, and let's say I want the room and overhead mics going out of output 4. So I'm going to go ahead and just, now one of the cool things that we could do is actually have Groove Agent automatically record its part here. So I'm going to, I think we have just our Groove Agent, so let me just, okay, I just want to find, I'm just going to make a MIDI part here. Okay, so now I'm going to have Groove Agent automatically synchronize. So I'll just play, and then now it's automatically just spitting out the MIDI data here. And let's say I just want to do fill. All right, so now what I want to do is render in place. And I'll just come here, and we want to use, and I'll just try dry, and I think this might just do. So now I have so at that point, you could also, I believe, just go to your effects and send your effects out to the different outputs as well. But you can't just render the effects internally to Groove Agent. Just do your batch export and have all the effects carried over as well. So give that a try, Grant. I think you'll be happy. Okay, so we have a question on Metronome. Sometimes people go, oh, it stops working. Why is it, so if I come here, So one is make sure that this is turned on, and you can do that by hitting C. Now, as I want to go into my VST connections, I could hit F4 and not F5. And depending on your setup, so you could choose your outputs, but make sure that your click is turned on there. If you're using the control room, what you want to do is to set it up so that you go to the control room settings here. So let's say if I just go to my mixer, and you want to make sure that the metronome is turned on in the control room. So if you check those two places, I bet it will start working for you. All right, let's go through some of our questions, and we still had some questions mailed in. Is there any way to change VSTI presets using a MIDI controller? I know that some of the controllers, like the AI knob, will allow you to do that. So like the CC121 or the CMC AI. But some of them will actually just kind of spit out controllers, and some of them will just allow you to go up or down in a list, like up or down arrows, and that often works for well. So we see a question, okay, what is the function of the control room? So this is a great question. We won't spend, we've done this a number of times, but we'll give you a quick overview of it. So when people are often doing a mix, you know, one of the problems that people run into is the fact that, just revert this one more time here. So often when you look at a console, you have kind of like, you know, a middle portion of the console. You have like your mixer here. So let's say, now what a lot of people do is actually just kind of take their master fader here, and this is now the volume control for the mixer. And that's often not a good thing. So we often get this call of like, oh, you know, I had my, you know, I exported my mix and it sounds really wimpy now. So let me just set this, my meter preferences here really quick. So as you adjust this, you may notice that your master output, so sometimes people have their speakers cranked up and they go to export their mix and they go, oh, it sounds really wimpy. And you go, oh, where's your master fader at? Or I go, minus 31 dB. So what the control room section allows you to do is to have a separate monitoring source without having the gain structure of the mix affected. Now, it does a lot more. One is you could have all sorts of different meterings. So if you want to see British scale or Bobcat's 2014, 12, or 14 scales. But the control room also allows you to do stuff like, I have multiple speakers, so I wanted to switch between different speakers. I wanted to also have downmix presets, so if I want to listen to it in stereo or mono, to make sure that was working. I could set up headphone mixes for different musicians. If I wanted to have like an external reference, like from a CD player, I could just come here and choose to listen to my mix versus something coming off a DVD player, and now I could listen to the DVD player. I could also just kind of take, you may notice that sometimes you have like a little, you know, like an L. So when I come here, we could adjust, you know, so I come here, if I solo my bass track, the air tracks will go down. But there's also this listen. And what that'll do is you could actually come here to the main and you can have a listen dim level. So you could actually listen to the air track still and have the air track just kind of, so that when you hit listen, the air track just kind of gets muted down a bit. So, and also for setting up different headphone mixes. So the control room is kind of like an independent monitoring source. So if you have like different speakers and you want those speakers to switch without having to buy unnecessary hardware, you could also configure an input of your audio interface as talkback, so you could communicate with people as they wear their headphones while they're recording. So control room does a lot of great stuff like that, and we could spend some more time on it in future Hangouts, but there's a number of videos online that go over it, but that'll give you kind of a taste of what you could do, hopefully. All right, so we had a question on macros. The question was, the macros are kind of a mystery. Okay, so, there's a number of different functions in Cubase that, and one of the great things of Cubase is it's so highly configurable where you can make your own keyboard shortcuts for almost every function in the program. But sometimes you may go, I want to do this function followed by this function, followed by this function, and that function. So this is where macros go in, because you can basically set up a chain of key commands. So when you start this, you can say, okay, I want to do a new macro. We'll just type in whatever. And the first step of this macro is, like, let's say for the MIDI events where I wanted to select all the events and invert them. So that was like 2 steps, but I want to do that 100 times a day. So I could just come over here and we could go to so these will all be organized by the categories. So I think we go to edit, and then, or maybe it's under select. All right, so let's just say I want to select, and you could actually kind of type in if you don't want to search, and then hit next. So anything that has the word select in it. So let's say I want to just, and then I could add that command. All right. And then I wanted to add this command to my macro. So I could select this, and now let's add that command, add this command. So like if I wanted to, and you could actually trigger logical editor presets, project logical editor presets as well. So you could do, like, I wanted to move the selection to new track version. So here I chose, I want to edit, copy, we want to edit, delete that event, track versions, new version, and then edit, paste it, origin. So instead of doing that manually every time, I could now trigger that macro. And if you wanted to create your own custom key commands for macros, you could do that, or access them directly from the edit menu, so you can see all of your macros there. So go ahead and kind of play around with it, and I think you could, if you find yourself doing something repeatedly, try creating a macro for it. So we had a question. Is there a way to make chord pads play 1 or 2 notes in a scale? I think, by definition, a chord is going to be 3 notes. So, but there is a thing you could do called sections, and this came in, I believe, version 8.5, if memory serves. So let me just open up a project. Let me just find this project I would kind of set up for this. All right, here we go. So we got to have the orchestra tune up here. Okay, so right now I have, we'll just get this started. Just take record off. Okay, so let's say I have my high strings and I want to come over here and let me just set this for the right octave.
What did you say? What did you put the close side up on your...
All right, I'm just... Okay, so I'm just going to find the right octave here. So I'm going to actually, so I could use a MIDI message here. So you can see I'm just hitting this C here, and that will play the chord. So if I just kind of come here and say, let's do this. Now, within the chord pads, you could just have it be playing chords. I'll just turn this, make this a little louder for you. So let's say I just hit the chords here. And then I could just hit that MIDI note here. But on the player's menu, so if you come right here, you could actually say sections. And what this is going to allow you to do is you see these notes here that are kind of the orangish in color. You can now just kind of hit those particular. So I'm hitting these 4 notes here on my software MIDI keyboard. So I could hit 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes. So make sure that you have this set right here to sections, and then you could play each of the notes within a chord from a MIDI keyboard. So if you're not a great MIDI keyboard player, you could actually just hit those 4 notes, and then use the other hand to switch the chords and just hit those 4 notes that are just conveniently mapped to white keys on the MIDI keyboard. So I think that'll do what you want to. If not, just let me know, and then just leave a comment. All right, so if you want to go to someone asked where the show macros function was. So if you go to File, to Key Commands, and then right here in the bottom of the key commands, you'll see Show Macros. So I see someone making a comment that they don't see that in Cubase Elements 8, and that might be one of the things that's in the higher versions and not in the Elements version. And also with the batch export. So that's one of the features. It's in the higher versions. All right, so I had a question on Hypnotic Dance. Let me see. I think I have that installed. Let me just make sure. Let me see if I have it inside of Hallian. Yeah, I don't have Hypnotic Dance installed, but I'll try to get it installed for the next Hangout. If you want to email me that question to ClubCubase at Steinberg.net. All right, so we had a question from Owen. If you hold down the Alt key while clicking E in a track, I can open up multiple tracks on screen at once. Is there a way to set it up so holding Alt and clicking E on a mixer? I don't think so. I think it's really one kind of mixer channel at once. But I'll pass that on and see if there's a way of doing it. Okay, so we see a question. Does it matter to higher sample rate? No. All right, so we have a question here. Is there a way to move audio by ticks? Is 128 the smallest value you could go to, or do you have to go into timecode mode and move by frames? So when we have, let's say, an audio file here, let me just drop a sample in here. Okay, so if you just come here, so if you have snap turned on, the snap value will actually be based on, like right now, if I move this event, it's automatically going to snap to bars. If I have this subdivision set to beat, I can snap to beats or a quantize value. So you could set that to be 128. Now, if I move this anywhere, let's say, and now I could ever so slightly move the audio event, and I could just simply move it, my start position. You could just come here on the info line and do that. But everything in Cubase is based at the sample level. So if I just change my master time here to time code, now I could snap to or just come right here and I say, let's go to time code. Now I could snap to one frame, or if you choose samples, I could snap it to one sample. So if you wanted to zoom in and just have that automatically snap down to 1/192,000th of a second, depending on your sample rate, you could do that. But you can freely move everything around, but it's when it's set to snap that it'll just kind of snap to defined intervals based on the master time resolution you have selected. Okay, just going through some of the comments here and questions. Someone is noticing I keep erasing things. I think I just have it when I was playing with preferences earlier today. So I think if I go to here, I could enable record on selected track or selected MIDI track. So that'll take that off. Sorry I meant to switch it earlier. All right, so we have a question on kind of the MIDI activity light. And the question is, I have a Novation launch key MIDI, and it keeps feeding MIDI data into Cubase. The MIDI in indicator keeps pulsating when I have the MIDI plugged in. Any idea why? It's because it's spitting out the MIDI data. So sometimes controllers and different companies will send active sensing information. So you may want to see if there's a way to kind of disable active sensing information. You could always right click and just kind of turn the MIDI activity off as well. Okay, so we had a question. Is there a way to resize the global or selected track height with the mouse wheel and not the plus minus button at the bottom right hand of the window or the Z button? How I do it is, let's say if I have a number of tracks, and I'll just set up a new project for this. Okay, so if I just hold down the control key, you can resize all the tracks at once and just kind of move that. If you do the alt key, you could just do the one individual track, or the control key just kind of just like that. So that's how I do it. I find it works really well. Okay, so here's a question. Is there a way you can play back from a specific section, like for instance in Ableton, if you hit Shift plus space, the section that is selected within the MIDI clip, it's played back from that point. Just switch projects here. I think there's a... Let me see if I can remember the... There's one keyboard shortcut I was thinking of, but let me see if I could find it under the key commands. I think there's a way of doing this. I'm trying to remember my key command trick. So there's a, play from selection start. So say I do... So this is how you could assign your own key command. So say Alt Shift A. I'll just try that. Yep. So you could just come right over here and under key commands, under transport, there's the play from selection start. So that's what you could set up for that. Okay, and one other question, and this will probably go into the feature request, is to import mono files to stereo tracks. And it's kind of necessary if you want to use stereo VSTIs. There isn't a way to do that automatically. You can, as you mentioned in your email, that you could send, you could copy it to a stereo track and play it back. Some people will send the mono track and just create a group and put the mono effects on a channel and the stereo effects on the group. And you could probably create a macro to automatically start to import the track, move the track, add a stereo track, move that down. So you could do that, but there isn't a way automatically to do it, but I'll pass that on. So let's go through. Okay, so let me just jump back through some other questions. Is there an easy way to move all my saved kits I create in Groove Agent from SE from one computer to another without exporting them one by one? I think if you just look at the media bay, it's going to kind of show up under user content, but I think you could actually just copy the folder from media bay. So let's say if we made our own, so it's going to show up under user contents. And if you kind of, let's just select, let's see if I made like a track preset I should have. So as soon as you kind of look here and you kind of keep heading over, I think you should be able to, if you just go into, it's going to kind of show up in different places. If you're on PC, since I'm on PC, I can't really show you the Mac here. But if we go to all programs, and we'll go to, let's just say, Cubase. If you jump here, you could actually go back to this. This will open up your application data folder. And if you go Steinberg to content, usually under VST sound, you can see your user content. So I think if you copy that folder, that would include all of your Groove Agent kits as well. So you could give that a try. And then I don't think you'd have to do it one by one. Okay, just going through some of your questions sent in. Okay, so we had a question on, is there a in Retrolog? So let me just go ahead and we'll open up about the ADSR. So I'll just add. So your ADSR is just right here in Retrolog. So also there. So okay, we have a question. Can you play a Cubase project created on a Mac, on a PC, vice versa? Yep, no problem. So the files are interchangeable. You could open it in Nuendo. You could open it in Cubase. You could take a project in Cubasis that was created there and open it in Cubase as well. Okay, so question, so a couple of questions come in. Okay, so question was, does it improve the sound quality to render at higher sample rates? It doesn't. It can really depend on the source material and what effects you're using. So if you're doing like a really very subtle classical thing with lots of details and you have a really high quality reverb, that can make a difference. But if you're just kind of capturing, obviously you probably want to capture at the highest sample rate, but depending on the plugins that you're using for mixing, like a dance track, you may not notice a huge difference rendering it 48 or 96K, but if you're doing classical things with all sorts of amazing convolution reverbs, then you might notice a difference. Okay, so how do you make a stereo track mono when bouncing in place? Okay, that's a great question. So we'll go ahead and try this. We'll go to render in place. So we have a stereo file right here. I think it might change it. Yeah, I think the stereo tracks will stay stereo. So, and just make sure I'm reading that question correctly. You could probably, let me just try something here. Yeah, so you might be able to run it through another plugin to convert it. But let me just try something. Try one thing, making a stereo track mono and render in place. So, I'm just going to add a mono output here. And let's route this to our mono out. And let's render in place. No. Sometimes I thought that might do it, but you might have to... I don't know of a good way, effective way of doing it. So, I'm not, if there's, maybe if the files were accidentally rendered as stereo first and then you wanted them as mono, you could change the output routing. But I don't know a way to do that with a render in place. If we do select this and do the export audio mix down, at that point you could have that do a mono down mix, and then we could export that to, so let's say, and then just do your mono down mix there. But I don't know a way with the render in place. Okay, so we have a question. Is the pan range representing 100% of 180 degrees, so that 10% is 18 degrees? Well, 180 degrees would be kind of a full circle, so it's not necessarily just left and right. So I don't think that the geometrical degrees is going to matter like that, since it's only in front and not at your sides. So I think that it would probably be if you were doing surround, If you're doing kind of, more surround mixing, that would be more applicable, but not if you're doing stereo audio, where it's just left and right and front. All right. I'm going to go back to some of the sent in questions and make sure I got through some of those. Just give me a second. Okay, is there a way to make the input gain visible in the mixer like in Cubase 6.5? So when we go to particular projects, what you want to do is, let me just open up a project at, say, like this. And this kind of changed in, I noticed you mentioned 6.5, so it's probably changed in your mixer. So if you click right here on the left-hand side, just make sure that your input channels are active, and then your input channels will be visible in the mixer. So again, you come over here just to the left where it says configuration, click on that icon, and then you could hide, enable, or disable the input channels in the mixer. Okay, just going back through some of the questions that were sent in. Okay, so there's a question on, I got a Mackie MCU Pro, but I cannot configure it to V-Spots fader return automatically to the point if I use it. Make sure it could depend on your automation mode that you're in. And sometimes the control surfaces have different mechanisms. I haven't worked with the Mackie control in years. But, you could also just kind of change like the automation parameters. So like here, if I have this particular track in touch automation, it's only going to, so let's say if I'm just kind of playing along and I start automating, and if you have, so you could kind of sometimes just do, and depending on if there's existing automation there, you can say, okay, I just want to bump it where it's only going to do automation until you touch. So try experimenting with your different automation modes, but some controllers have nulling points, some will automatically kind of go back, but if you experiment with different automation modes, I think that'll work. Okay, so we had a question on third-party plugins. So let's read this real quick. Question that was emailed in earlier. Can you discuss managing VST, specifically the paths in the plugin info manager for VST 2.0 and plugins as it states? VST 3 doesn't need a path. Should I let the installer for Steinberg and third-party VST plugins decide where to install them, or create and save everything to a C:VST folder? Or should VST 2 and 3 be in different folders? How can I disable certain plugins to troubleshoot an issue? So a lot of this is, I see that you said like C:, because on Windows, what I personally do is I have all of my plugins installed. Like if I get plugins from Lexicon, I'll install them into C Steinberg. I install them into a common folder. So I'll say C Steinberg, program files, Steinberg VST plugins, Lexicon. But different plugin companies, sometimes they allow you to define the VST plugin path, and sometimes they don't. VST 2 and 3 plugins can be in the same folders, no problems there. But you could really experiment kind of with the plugin manager and the where you could actually see the VST plugin paths. If you click here in the setup, here you can just add. It doesn't really matter where the plugins are; they can be scattered all over your hard drive. But to make sure that those plugins are in this plugin path, and then hit update, and then that should scan the system. So, some people still have, some 32-bit plugins, which are a bit rogue and can often cause problems in contemporary operating systems. So those, if you're looking for culprits, that's a good place to look. So, but it could be anywhere, installed anywhere. So no problem. All right, there's a question. How do I add more drums in the step sequencer in Beat Designer playing at once? So when we have the Beat Designer plugin, it's really kind of set up to do, like, it's a MIDI insert plugin. It's going to allow you to, program drums very effectively. But it's really kind of limited to seeing 8 different sources. And it's kind of meant to be a very quick and easy kind of, drum programming tool. But if you really want to see more, I've seen some people will have multiple beat designers with different instruments loaded. I've seen that, but you could do so much editing, I found, directly in just, making sure that you come here to the drum. So let's say if I wanted to add a track instrument, I'll just load up a Groove Agent here. And now, as soon as you do this, you could actually have it automatically. I'm going to just load up a kit here. So now it's going to load up all the samples for us. And now that we have a kit loaded, we could automatically extract the drum names. So if you click here, you'll see where it says no drum map. You say create drum map from the VST3 instrument. So it's a great feature, because now when you go into a particular part, you can now just automatically double click and see all the drum sound names. And here you can see 128 different drum sounds. So if you want to just program directly in the drum editor, that's a really great way of working with that. So let me just turn that off. Okay, just going through, see some of the people had emailed questions. I'm not forgetting any of those. Okay, so we have a question: how to save events from my current project to another project as new one, just pieces of events without any others. So one of the tricks you could do is if you go into your media menu and then go into the pool window. At this point, if you have files from different locations, you could actually just right click, and then there's a conform files, and conform files will then copy all of the files directly over to your system. Now, one of the things that's also a nifty trick for file management, if you have like a lot of files that you're not necessarily using, you could choose to do from the file menu a backup project. So as soon as I come here, we could just say, I want to select this folder. And then you have options here where you can say, okay, I want to keep the current project active, but you have like, I want to remove unused files. And then you could also minimize audio files. So let's say if you use like 5 seconds of a 4-minute audio recording, if you choose minimize the audio files, you don't have the unnecessary 3 minutes and 55 seconds of that audio file. And you could just simply come over here and choose to, if you had 10 takes of one thing, you used one, you could remove the unused file. So you could do some kind of media cleanup that way. Okay, going through some other questions, make sure I got these. Okay, I think we got through all questions that were sent in. Okay, so there's a question. Can we explain the difference in functionality between VST 2 and 3? So when we're kind of working, so VST 3 is kind of the latest version. One is it's going to allow you to do with version 3.5 for instruments, it's going to allow you to do the note expression where you could have the independent MIDI controls. It also doesn't, VST3 plugins, are kind of any channel width. So if you're working in different surround formats, they'll automatically be able to accommodate different channel widths. One of the big things is you could also, if the plugin isn't actually doing processing, it doesn't take CPU cycles. So a lot of plugin formats, as soon as you turn them on, they start sucking away your CPU or DSP resources. So with that, so those are some of the highlights of EST3, plus kind of new naming and preset management, and a lot more stability, as well as support for all the later operating systems and efficiency. So okay, so let's just check this out. Can I use sound fonts in Cubase 8.5? Oh, it used to be like 15 years ago that you could import those. I think you could import them into our Hallian sampler still, but they haven't quite been as popular of a format, so I don't think they import directly in. Okay, so just going through. So let me just go through a couple here. Okay, so I'm seeing, we talked a little bit about doing stereo to mono, and the person asked the question was clarified as drums imported from machine or in stereo, trying to get the kick or snare to mono is complicated. If you do the batch if you just choose to do the render or the batch export or the audio file export, that will do the trick for you. Let me just... Okay, so let me just cycle back. Okay, can various instruments be named in the inspector? You could see different patch names from the inspector for different instruments. But you, depending on the VST instrument names would automatically carry over as part of the VST spec. Okay, so we're seeing, please suggest a Steinberg for Cubase 9, be able to rearrange any channel, color entire channel, not just a name tag, and meter numbers visible when channel is zoomed in skinny. All right. Okay, I'll pass that on again. So let me see if there's any last minute questions that have popped up. If there's one last quick thing before we wrap up, we know we've been going almost 3 hours now, so it's probably our longest Hangout to date. But I thought we had a lot of great questions. There's a last minute quick question. Okay. So how does Rewire work with Reason? Just kind of turn both of them on and you'll see your Rewire devices. So Cubase is the first program to support Rewire. So with Groove Agent, if you wanted to remap the names, right click on the pads and then you could edit learn trigger note. So if you wanted to mapping for machine compatibility, that's all you have to do. All right, so we see that the index will be completed in the next day or two, hopefully by tomorrow evening. Thank you so much. That's always a real help. We covered a lot of different topics today. Okay, what are the selling points for Hallian 5 against Contact? I think Hallian 5 is a really phenomenal sound design tool. I think also it has built-in synthesis without having to necessarily rely so much on the samples. And I think sound-wise, you know, when I've kind of used both of them with similar content and the same content, that Hallion sounds better to me. So, but try it out, and I think you'll, you know, there's many of my film composer friends, Hallion is their secret weapon. And great efficiency and integration with Cubase, being able to drag and drop. Okay, we'll go ahead and we're just going to wrap up. We'll wait a minute, see if there's any quick last-minute questions. We'll be doing this again next month. Thank you, everyone that's watched. Thank you, everyone, for a great discussion, great questions. I hope everyone learned something. So if you have any last-minute quick questions before we wrap up, we'll do that. If not, we'll see you next month. If you have questions for the future, you can always send them in advance. Sometimes it's nice to set up a quick, you know, tutorial, a quick project to get a point across quicker. But you could always send any questions to ClubCubase@steinberg.net. So just hang out just one more second, see if there's any more last-minute questions. If not, we'll wrap up and say goodnight. Thank you, everyone. It's always great to have so many people from around the world involved, and we hope that everyone's learned a new trick. And I'll just wait one more second, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you very much. Have a great night, and we'll see you next month.